Manchester United got all 3 points against Burnley in the Premier League, a clean sheet and a win away from home with a beautiful Bruno Fernandes goal from a magnificent Johnny Evans assist. You cannot downplay the significance of this result. Here is why. Let's analyze. All right, let's talk tactics. So Vincent Kompany sets up his team in a typical 4-3-3 formation. But of course, as you may have noticed in the game, he likes to do what all teams do right now, which is the new tactical trends. Of course, using inverted wing backs to come right in front of the center backs, basically forming this shape, this 2-3 shape in the build-up phase. Now, when I was watching this game, and after seeing Burnley apply this same strategy as other teams like Brighton, for example, I was thinking something, and then the commentators say the exact same thing, which is that a lot of teams are mimicking this strategy, this shape right here, this formation, but a lot of the new managers don't actually stop and think about whether it is actually effective, whether they should actually be lining up in this kind of shape, right? And I think that Burnley falls into that category because when you look at it this way, their shape is actually similar to that of Brighton. So how come Brighton are so effective with it and Burnley aren't? Well, it's because Brighton do have two highly effective wingers in Mitoma and Solly March. They do have Premier League winners in James Milner, Lallana and Danny Welbeck. And they do have amazing forwards like Ansu Fati and Ferguson, as well as Joao Pedro. So there is a lot of movement happening here that makes Brighton that much more dangerous with this kind of setup. If this setup was divided into two phases, right? So you have the build-up phase and the attacking phase. I'd say that Brighton gets it right in both phases, but Burnley only gets it right in this build-up phase, which meant that during this game, they actually just end up passing the ball in this area right here in their own half, because Erik Ten Hag, again, a manager who, tactically speaking, is very good at setting up his team to counter the strengths of the opposition. This is why he started off without a winger. For example, Pelistri, who I think tried really hard against Bayern, and I think that he needs more opportunities to show what he can do. He's definitely a talented youngster, but in this game, I agree with Erik Ten Hag in not starting Pelistri, because what Erik Ten Hag wanted to do is that he wanted to play really narrow. So he wanted players who were as effective on the wings as they are through the middle. This is why he moved Bruno Fernandes slightly to the right and Rashford on the left, with Hannibal, who was amazing in this game. That kid's got fighting spirit. He definitely does. Through the middle. With, of course, Scott McTominay and Casemiro marking the two other midfielders, Ramsey and Brownhill. And then Højlund pressing Al-Dakhil and Bayer. And so what this meant, with Burnley not being really effective in the final third, and with Manchester United's man marking system, that means that even though they had possession most of the game, they actually did not dominate the game. We dominated the game because we actually stopped them from doing what they wanted and what they intended on doing. This Burnley team are very good. They do have some really good, agile, technical players. But of course, the ball was mostly restricted to these areas because they could not pass it to the forward players. And when they did, their forward players are actually not as effective as some forward players in teams like Brighton or Spurs, for example. And so Erik Ten Hag got his tactics right. But what I'm going to show you now in the next sequence is how, even when you get your tactics right, sometimes a lack of focus or just one player making a mistake can result in you having results that are opposite of what you were expecting. So let's have a look. It is very important to distinguish between tactics and between executing those tactics. And I think that here against Burnley, we had two very good examples of how having the best tactical systems could still be outdone by individual mistakes. And here I'm going to show you two examples. One where it's an instance of one individual mistake by Marcus Rashford, and another one where it's more of a collective failure because many players did not do their jobs, mostly because I believe they were confused. So let's look at those examples. So the first example is this one. The ball comes in, so of course Burnley are building up from the back. Now, as you can see here, that typical shape with Højlund putting pressure on the center backs, and then Bruno Fernandes, Hannibal and Marcus Rashford putting pressure on the two fullbacks and the defensive midfielder who are right here. But here what you can see is that Bruno Fernandes and Hannibal are actually working really hard. Bruno Fernandes is going to put pressure on the left back, Charlie Taylor, who he's assigned to, and then Hannibal is trying to cover this space so that if the ball goes in here, we can have an extra man in midfield to protect us. But Marcus Rashford here is not doing his job of tracking Roberts. He's supposed to be man on this guy right here. And by not being close to him, what he does is that he indicates to Charlie Taylor that Roberts is actually a good option, because Charlie Taylor would never make this pass had Rashford been in this area right here. So anyway, the ball comes towards Taylor. Now Rashford has to track back and he has to sprint. But the ball comes in, Marcus Rashford reaches this area, half space is extremely dangerous, passes into these areas with a cutback. And guys, remember, most of the goals that we have conceded in the past few games were because of cutbacks. Against Brighton, all 3 goals were cutbacks to this area right here, where the goalkeeper had no chance whatsoever. So Burnley, they know that we are weak in this phase of play right here, in these areas, in these zones. Rashford, what is he doing? He's not tracking. He thinks that it's Reguilon's job, but it's not. This is Marcus Rashford's job. He should be going with this player until the ball goes out of play. He doesn't, and then now there is a cross, and thankfully, Onana with a beautiful save. But that is an example of how Marcus Rashford, one lapse in concentration, one case of him not doing his job properly, could have cost us the game, even though tactically we were well set up. Tactics versus execution. Now let's look at another example. As you can see, Hannibal is here. We were here transitioning from a set piece that we've cleared, okay? So Burnley are trying to build back up, and as you can see here, Hannibal is a little bit out of position because he was actually applying pressure on Burnley as we were clearing the set piece. But here you're gonna see a few problems. So we do have Rashford here, but you're gonna see that we don't have Bruno Fernandes because it was a set piece. Højlund is coming back into his position as Hannibal is coming back deeper. But look, Bruno Fernandes is here on the left-hand side, because remember, this was a set piece. But here we do have a problem, and it's Scott McTominay here. Because Bruno Fernandes is occupying Scott McTominay's position, he should have that, you know, intelligence to say, well, if Bruno is here, I should go there. But he doesn't. And so here, Burnley identify a weak spot in the Manchester United shape. So of course they're gonna try to exploit it. Casemiro is marking his player, but we need to have an extra player in this area. That extra player usually is Bruno Fernandes, but because we're clearing from a set piece, he finds himself in this area. So one player should have taken this responsibility, either Højlund or Scott McTominay. One of these two should have been here, but they didn't. Again, this is miscommunication. I don't know if Erik Ten Hag is the kind of manager who is quite rigid with his players. So does he assign specific zones for specific players and they have to stick to it? Or is he the kind of manager who gives them, you know, the power to make these kind of decisions and decide what they should do, whether they should press, which area they should press in or not, whether they should swap positions or not. So I don't know what the case with that is, so I cannot give a true evaluation of the situation. But this is an example of dysfunction. Of course, that leads to one pass, another pass, and this could have been 1-0 Burnley. And had they scored this, because it hit the post, had they scored this, I am convinced that we would have probably lost the game. Because that's exactly the same scenario that has panned out over the past few games. So here we got a break. We got a lucky break, because had they scored, I think, again, all of our specters from the past would have come to haunt us. Playing away from home, I don't think we would have recovered. There is a key concept in behavioral psychology, and it is to always break the chain of bad habits. And this is why you shouldn't downplay the significance of this Manchester United win against Burnley. In this case, in a footballing context, the bad habits are losing as opposed to winning. Because when you go on a streak of wins, what it does to you is that you start feeling like a winner. You start telling yourself that you're a winner. You start behaving like a winner, and you start punching above your weight because of the morale and mentality boost that you are getting from winning. And the opposite is true for losing. The more you lose, the more you start thinking of yourself as a loser, the more you start behaving like a loser, the more you start accepting that you are a loser. This is why Erik Ten Hag, I am sure that his pre-game team talk was centered around this idea. Guys, two things: clean sheet, 3 points. Let's get these things. 1-0, that is the priority. And even under Sir Alex Ferguson, I've been watching Manchester United since the late 90s. And under Sir Alex Ferguson, even though we were known as a team that played exciting, attacking football, sometimes when results didn't go our way, when we got bad results, you know, 2, 3, 4 games in a row, Sir Alex Ferguson was pragmatic enough to just lock things up. We would play more compact, we would keep control of the ball, our substitutions would be more conservative, and we wouldn't take a lot of risks on the pitch. And the goal was to win 1-0, 1-0, 2-0, 1-0, 1-0. You win like that, focusing on getting clean sheets and 3 points, 4, 5, 6 games in a row. It's like pushing the reset button. You just bring that confidence back. Your team starts feeling like winners again. And then slowly, progressively, you add back the flair, the creativity, the swagger. But you have to go back to basics and start winning those games. Because the more wins you have, the more you start feeling like a winner. And this is even more important because the run of game that we are facing now. The run of games we are facing are against teams like Crystal Palace, Copenhagen and Galatasaray in the league, Sheffield United. We are playing Everton, Fulham and Luton after Manchester City as well. So we have a great opportunity here. Also, bear in mind that we're going to be playing Copenhagen and Galatasaray twice before we play Bayern Munich. That means that if we focus on this, getting clean sheets, winning 1-0, 2-0. I don't care about how we play right now, just as long as we control games, just as long as we see games through and we get the results. With the blink of an eye, by the end of November, we could be through to the next round in the Champions League, and we could be in contention in and around top 4, depending on the results of the opposition teams. So I think that that's what we should focus on right now. We do have a clear opportunity to do this. Beautiful football is going to come later. Titles are built on defense. That's what happens. Attack comes later. So I think that right now, a lot of our players like Onana, our defenders, our midfielders, they're not really confident. And I think that the team is going to benefit a lot mentally from just getting those clean sheets and those wins. So I think we still have 3 or 4 Premier League games before Manchester City, who we are playing at home. And then after that, we're going to have another 3 Premier League games against Fulham, Luton and Everton before we start facing the likes of Newcastle, Chelsea, Bayern Munich and Liverpool. So I think that before December, if we can win the majority of our Premier League games and Champions League games, we are going to be in good shape. All of the noise in social media targeting Manchester United is going to die down. They're going to move on to another victim, another target, and we're going to have the luxury to work in peace. Because I think that this team and these players are good enough. The manager is definitely good enough. I just think that we need a break. That's what we need. And I think that to get that break, we have to control things down. Run the clock. You know, just like in boxing. Just cover, you know, just play by the strings, by the ropes, right? Just run down the clock. That's what we need to do right now. 1-0, 1-0, 1-0 for the next few games. Let's start feeling and thinking of ourselves like winners. This is the first time in a few weeks that the players are going to go back to the dressing room and face a smiling Erik Ten Hag, a smiling Steve McLaren, who are going to joke around with them. We're going to tell them, attaboy, you did great. The post-match briefing on Monday is going to be like, okay, guys, we can improve on this and that, but well done. You got the 3 points. Now we have something to build on. Let's keep going. And I think that that's just going to improve everything. The relationship between the manager and his staff and the players, and the relationship between the players, and the relationship between the players, the manager, and the fans. So guys, keep supporting Manchester United. Let me know what you think about this analysis in the comment section below. Until next time, cheers.